NFL Week 8 is almost over, so as always, it's time to take a look at our fantasy football rosters and decide ourselves some heroes and zeros.
Fantasy Heroes.
After just 2 weeks without a touchdown, James Cook was back cooking up trips to the end zone, just the 216 rushing yards.
Kraft took it into the feast of poor Steelers coverage as he ate with 143 yards, 2 touchdowns, and is now tight end 2 on the season.
Saquon had his fancy managers laughing all the way to the bank. Is Barkley's bad run?
The swashbuckling Tampa Bay defense made Rattler and the Saints walk the plank and came away with a mammoth 28 fancy points.
Can we cease the negative talk about Brees, or do points against the worst defense not really count for Hall? 133 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns will give some peace, at least.
We've run out of Timberlake puns because JT is crushing it every single week. His fourth 30-plus score in Week 8 means I can't stop the feeling that he is on course to be this year's Fantasy MVP.
Do you think we are the puns and rhymes equivalent of JT? Because we also, Ed, are crushing it every single week.
I think we might be.
It was definitely a down week for the next lineup, though.
Fantasy Zeros.
Baker may have been the worst player on the field against the Saints. Oh wait, Rattler was there too. The pair combined for only 5.7 points.
Has anyone seen Quentin Johnston? Justin Herbert certainly couldn't on Thursday night.
Robinson had the shaky Dolphins defense this week, so we expected Bijan to put some mustard on it. Instead, we got 48 yards, lost one and only 4.8 points.
Andy Dalton was rubbish. That's all.
Winshon's breakout is on pause as Jeudy went without a tuddy and got the 87% of leagues that started him, only 4.7 points.
Jake Ferguson been tight end treat all season, but tricked us in week 8 as he turned his one target to 0 yards and 0 fantasy points. We are going to get into some more tricks and treats later on in today's show, but lots of talking points from week 8, weren't there, Ed?
Yes, there were. There was some big scores and some disappointing scores as well. But yeah, it was a very busy week for fantasy.
We're going to get on some disappointment because we are going to talk at some point about Jets versus Bengals. Sorry, Edward, but it's going to have to happen. Some positive news, though. Aronde Gadsden did it again. 5 for 5, 77 yards and a touchdown. And for the Chargers, Kamani Vidal seemed competently filling for Amari Hampton at present with 23 carries for over 100 yards and a touchdown. My happiest piece of news, though, from the Chargers this week was Ladd McConkey now has 3 15-point games in a row. Is wide receiver 15 overall and ascending? Is the panic over?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's now doing what we expected him to do, and he's emerging as the top target there.
I mean, it could just be that if you say enough things, something coincidental happens eventually. But just after we were saying we really hope to hear more of Trey Harris soon as well. He got his touchdown, 2 receptions, 8 yards and a touchdown. Efficient is the only word we use in situations like that. Justin Jefferson looks though, this is a word we don't use lightly, but is he a bit of a bust for fantasy 8 weeks into the season? Consensus wide receiver 1 in the draft and currently wide receiver 16 with only 2 top 12 weeks so far. That is a little bit of a worry. And then also for the Vikings, those who did roll the dice on Carson Wentz because you had no other options with all the bye weeks and injuries, unlucky. It could be worse, though. You could be Carson Wentz because I imagine he is still feeling it from Thursday Night Football. He took a battering, didn't he?
He had a rough ride indeed. Let's move on to have a look at the Patriots. I think we have to talk about them. Is Kayshon Boutte a legitimate fantasy asset now? 3 fantasy relevant games in a row, and he's building that great chemistry with Drake May. He's still only 53% rostered in redraft, and I saw him dropped to waivers in one league this week, and I don't know what was going through that person's mind. But surely he should be kind of 80% rostered. And is he the wide receiver 1 in New England now over Diggs? Diggs is still getting more targets, but Boutte is much more productive with the targets that he's getting. And I think we've got to ask the question, is Drake May in the running for MVP?
is certainly in the conversation, isn't it? I think that Dak was the person that people were speaking about kind of most positive thing over the last couple of weeks, but yesterday's performance potentially doesn't put him out there, and obviously, but when May just keeps churning out performances, we were expecting, as many people were, a bigger season, but he's superseded those expectations, hasn't he, really?
He's been superb. I mean, obviously from a fantasy perspective, but in real life, he's looked the absolute real deal. Very exciting talent.
No Nico Collins for Houston this week, but Hutchinson was wide receiver 8, Higgins was wide receiver 24, and Noel was wide receiver 32. Are they in the conversation for one of the best wide receiver rooms in the league looking towards the future? Tank Dell obviously to come back as well. What he will be like after that horrific injury, we don't know. I suppose my question is, are they going to be an absolute fantasy target or just an absolute minefield, because we never know who is going to be in the running for it? I know you're going to talk about one of those players later on, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a bit of a Packers receiving room for me. You won't know week to week who is going to be fantasy relevant, but yeah, some exciting talent in there.
I'm really looking forward to this next little section, Ed. So take it away.
I'm not talking about the result of the Jets-Bengals game, mainly because it makes me feel very sad. So I'll ignore the result, but let's just look at it from a fantasy perspective, because that's the only lens that I can potentially look at it through. I mean, it's difficult to get too excited about the poor performance of the Jets players, because, the Bengals defense plumbed new depths of atrociousness. If that was possible, they're definitely the worst NFL defense I've ever seen by a distance. It was a mega week for Breece Hall, but the bye, I think, stalls any momentum built up. And then he's got the Browns, who are a different proposition on defense. Ditto Justin Fields. This will be his highest score of the season. And then Mason Taylor, solid week as predicted, and he's probably a decent player to maybe slot in going forward. Joe Flacco, I mean, it looks like you probably have to be starting him right now. And I'd have him locked in against the Bears next week. Has Chase Brown and the Bengals run game finally clicked? 181 rushing yards for him across the last 2 weeks. And he got his first touchdown since week 1. P. Ryan was also relevant for the first time, but I wouldn't expect that to continue. And Jamar Chase quietly maneuvered his way to wide receiver 1. 38 receptions in 3 weeks is absolutely ridiculous.
Can I just read, just looking back at our TH Fantasy Football group chat yesterday, 50 minutes into Red Zone yesterday, the message you sent, Ed, was Flacco for MVP.
Yes, maybe I was getting a bit overexcited, but yeah, he's come in and done a job. It's just a shame that the defense especially is so spectacularly bad.
I didn't mention it earlier. I meant to mention it at the end of zeros, but on Mayfield and Rattler, Tyler Shock entered the game late in the third quarter and nearly beat both quarterbacks combined with his total of 5.32 points. That's just how bad that was. RJ Harvey, has he arrived? Possibly, but he did only have 56 total yards versus Dobbins' 121 yards, but 3 touchdowns to Dobbins' 0. So that's what makes the difference when it comes to that fantasy performance. It's a situation I think is worth watching moving forward. I think I would still prefer to put Dobbins in over Harvey, because yards tend to be stickier as far as statistics go than touchdowns. But it's certainly worth watching. I mentioned briefly that Tampa Bay Saints game. I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it?
I just love the fact that the Tampa Bay offense just seemed to have the week off against the Saints. Baker with 4.08 fantasy points, Egbuka with 6.5, and Sean Tucker was the only skilled player to break 10 points. 17 points for kicker Chase McLaughlin and 28 points for the defense got the job done. But yeah, the rest of the offense just had the week off. It was that easy against the Saints.
Speaking of a week off, we mentioned just how many star players we were without because of the bye week. So about a quarter of our flex-worthy players in the top 24 weren't available. Also, some players that just took the week off this week. So CMC, Bijan, Egbuka, Jake Ferguson all disappeared. So this is the sort of week where you could have been used to racking up the wins and then got a loss out of nowhere. There is one league that we have where I was 7-0 in Dynasty, absolutely flying. And then the bye weeks just absolutely wiped me out. I thought, don't worry, it's a league where I am very fortunate. I've got CMC and Bijan on my roster. That's it, just didn't work out. So yeah, it's one of those weeks from that point. So a little bit of a week 4 as we're approaching Halloween, some tricks and some treats, which is what we're going to look at next, isn't it, Ed?
Oh, I'm looking forward to this Halloween-themed segment.
So we're going to have a look at the week 8. So we're about halfway now through our fantasy season. Players that we think have been a bit of a trick for us so far, or those that have treated us. And we're basing this sort of on our ADP, also what we're expecting. And as you can see, I've had a lovely couple of days playing around on AI to produce some graphics for us. So some treats from us to come there. But you have got our first pick for a treat, Ed, and a player that has absolutely exceeded all expectation.
Indeed, an absolute treat. And we're starting off with Javonte Williams, got his little jack-o'-lantern pumpkin in his hand there. There are better graphics to come, to be honest. He was drafted, let's remember, as the RB38, behind the likes of, are you ready for this list? Behind the likes of Zach Charbonnet, Brian Robinson, Joe Mixon, and Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, Joe Mixon.
Joe Mixon. Yeah, still on the pup list, still yet to take a snap. I mean, looking back, that does look like he was massively going under the radar because he was, I mean, clear RB1, but he looked to be RB1 in Dallas ahead of Jaden Blue and Miles Sanders. But RB38 just seems insane. I mean, did anyone expect him to be RB5 after 8 weeks? Probably not. 9 total touchdowns, averaging 18.6 fantasy points per game, or 18.4 you've got on the slide there. I'll go with you. For someone who you probably drafted for a flex spot at best is a huge return. There have been no monster weeks, but he's someone who you can reliably plug into your lineup every week and seems to have a very solid floor. So yeah, great season from Javonte Williams so far.
Next up, I'm going to wide receiver and a player that's been an absolute treat for all that drafted him, and also just to watch week in, week out as well. Jackson Smith in Jigba. Plenty to get our teeth into here, especially when we're looking at the graphic. But he was drafted as the wide receiver 13. And although we saw the year 2 breakout in 2024, finish wide receiver 9, that kind of felt like it's a bit of his ceiling really this year. So at the time, a lot of drafts were going on. We weren't sure what Sam Darnold was going to be this year. We knew that DK Metcalf was going to be there to attract some of that coverage. So although his situation hadn't changed kind of where he is, it had changed a lot around him. But he's averaging 10 targets, 7 receptions, and 117 yards per game, and has 4 touchdowns already this season. He only had 6 across the whole of last season. It looks like we finally have the wide receiver we had hoped would be coming into the league after the 2023 NFL draft. Only had 4 top 12 weeks last year. Already has 5 in 2025, including 3 games over 25 points. So if you drafted JSN, all we can say is what an absolute treat you have had so far. We're going to take our pair of treats to start, though. We're now going to turn to some players we feel we've been a little bit tricked by. And next up, though, Ed, the one treat here is your favourite graphic of the show.
I love it. The AI has done us proud there. But unfortunately, we're looking from the trick lens, and we're looking at TJ Hawkinson, a player that, I mean, historically I was very high on. But I became, post-injury, I became, a bit concerned about what he would deliver. He was drafted as tight end 5, and he was someone expected clearly to return to maybe not his all-conquering best, but to have a much better 2025 after that horrible injury kept him out for the start of 2024. But he's been a bit part in the Vikings offense, struggling to maintain any consistency, whether it's alongside Carson Wentz or JJ McCarthy. He currently sits at tight end 22 and averaging just 7.9 fantasy points per game. I mean, there's a good chance you might have even dropped him in some of your redraft leagues. He's been that disappointing. Having said that, he's still being started in 47% of leagues, which seems very high for someone who has 2 scores of 10 or more fantasy points and has only managed 1 touchdown all season.
Yeah, is a player that I think we knew we were taking a bit of a risk on, but it just felt like the situation was right for him, didn't it? And we're not seeing that at all yet. The next player is a player. When the graphic pops up, don't go straight to the comments to tell me I'm an idiot. Just hear me out. So for me, Josh Allen has been a fantasy football trick so far. He hasn't had a bad season. That is definitely not what I'm about to say. He's QB9, QB3 in fantasy points per game, but he's only had 2 top 6 games and has also had a QB17 and a QB25 finish. Yes, he had a good game yesterday. Can't dispute that whatsoever. But it's consistency that you want if you're making a high pick quarterback, especially at the point that you're taking Josh Allen. And if we think about yesterday's game, and yes, you can say if about any sort of point you want to prove when it comes to statistics within sport. But if Ray Davis had got another half yard on his goal line rush, Allen doesn't get the touchdown on the QB sneak. He sits at 17.7 points and it's a QB 13 finish again. Now we know his rushing touchdowns, his rushing upside is what is part of his appeal. And we can what if all we like. He just seems to get these scattered out throughout. But so if you're drafting a QB in round 2, his ADP was the middle of round 2, so the 206. You absolutely have to be drafting a week in, week out difference maker at the position. And he's simply not been that yet this year. Players around him at the moment, so all above 20 fantasy points per game currently, and kind of we're obviously factoring that bye weeks as well. That's why I'm looking at the fantasy points per game instead of just the actual raw standings. We've got some players that you could have waited till a little bit later for and been just as happy. So Patrick Mahomes, early round 5. Lamar Jackson, the injuries in there as well. He's just above him, late round 2. Dak Prescott, round 10. Jalen Hurts, round 3. Drake May, round 11. Justin Herbert, round 9. Daniel Jones, undrafted as the QB 36 in ADP. So the point I'm trying to make with those players is that if you had taken a punt on half of the starting QBs, you could have had a quarterback that was doing just as good or very slightly worse, and then also had a chance in round 2 at taking Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Lad McConkey, etc., and had more of a difference maker at that point. So, yeah, please don't think we're trying to say he's having a bad season. Just at his cost, I think we've tricked ourselves into thinking that paying for a top quarterback gets it over the line. Is this a bit of my negative bills coming out, Ed, or am I making a case there?
No, I haven't got any Josh Allen in any leagues because he always went too high, and this is what I feared, that he's not going to get you those kind of massive scores every week, but as you've stated, that you need for him to be that difference maker. So no, I agree. I mean, Trick might be pushing it slightly, but yeah, I agree that he's been overdrafted, and if you did take him as one of your first picks, then you'll be disappointed.
Let's turn to some treats though again, Ed. And first up, you've got a player that we have loved speaking about over the years.
Yeah, Keenan Allen. I mean, clearly he's a fantasy legend, but his ADP of wide receiver 53 probably seemed fair. You know, he's 33. We weren't sure how the Chargers might fare, and he had big competition from Lad McConkey and Quentin Johnston. However, he's currently wide receiver 9, as you can see, with 15 fantasy points per game. And up until this point, although, as we mentioned earlier, that there has been a slight changing of the guard last couple of weeks, he has been Justin Herbert's top target, eclipsing the likes of Johnston and Lad McConkey. There are signs that kind of his early season consistency may be dropping off. He's thrown in a few bust weeks the last 4 weeks, but he's still probably going to be taking up one of your flex spots at least. His snap percentage this week against the Vikings is a little bit worrying, 25%, but I fully expect him to bounce back against the Titans next week. And so far at this stage, you're certainly very happy with what you've drafted. I think it's unlikely he will have as productive a second half to the season, but even so, considering where he was drafted, you'll be very happy.
Now, for my next pick, we've said with some of the tricks that there have been treat weeks in there as well. So for some of our treat players, we've had some tricks, and I was definitely tricked yesterday by Jake Ferguson, but he has absolutely been a treat for the majority of the season so far. I traded for him yesterday morning in one of our dynasty leagues where I just needed to kind of feel like I was guaranteed like a championship run. So I moved away Kyle Pitts for Jake Ferguson yesterday for a player plus draft pick deal. I was very happy with it.
It did make me laugh.
When I looked this morning, I took him absolutely perfect. I'm still confident with it moving forward.
Yeah, I think it will be going forward.
It did not work out week one. So Jake Ferguson, absolutely, I was a year too early on the Ferguson breakout. I think I spoke about him as being a borderline my guy character last season. It just didn't happen. And as a result, I don't have much of a redraft last year because that bias crept into me not wanting to draft him. Tight 10-1 so far, even with 0 points last night. Only 2 weeks outside of the top 10 tight ends, 7 receptions per game. He was on a 4-touchdown streak until he did nothing yesterday. All from being drafted as a tight end 15 in round 11 or 12. Now, there are several Cowboys we could have included here, maybe Dak until yesterday as well, but Pickens is in the mix as well for a bit of a treat player when we think about what he's done for us. This is why we've got 2 players in there. But for me, if you've got a player like Jake Ferguson, you absolutely know that you don't have to worry about waivers each week looking for tight ends, as I will do in many leagues if I go for that latest tight end pick. Yes, the 0, I'm still plugging in with confidence next week. I'm not worried by that. I think you look at the Cowboys as a whole, that was a bit of an anomalous game where they just came up against the Broncos in the absolute peak of their powers. But Jake Ferguson, drafting him as late as you did at tight end, an absolute treat for fantasy this year, and one that I've been happy to partake in with my trade, regardless of it not going very well yesterday. A player who's tricked us more frequently next, so we're moving to the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I mean, we were excited for the Bears in the preseason. We weren't quite sure how things would shake down in the receiver room. However, DJ Moore was the clear wide receiver 1 for the Bears, being drafted as wide receiver 22, far clear of Roma Dunze, who was being drafted as wide receiver 36. However, there's no other way of phrasing it. Moore's had a horrible season, and he's making a real case to be a bust of the season. If you drafted him, then you probably drafted him as someone you could slot into one of your receiver spots, solid floor, and the potential for some big weeks, and not worry about week to week. But he's wide receiver 40. He averages fewer than 10 fantasy points per game. He's had 1 touchdown, and he's also averaging fewer than 4 receptions per game. However, he does have the Bengals next week, so he'll be fine next week. But yeah, I think overall, yeah, you're very, very disappointed if you've drafted DJ Moore. And I mean, question marks have to hang over him from a fantasy perspective going forward, especially with the rise of Roma Dunze.
And our final trick is a player that has completely ghosted us for fantasy since we drafted him, and that is Jameson Williams.
I love it.
For many people thought he was going to have real good value. Even
that image is borderline offensive. I think it looks just ghost-like enough for us to get away with it. But
I did think about that, and I thought Ed won't make a comment that potentially makes this iffy.
No, it's ghost-like enough. I think we're all right.
He has completely ghosted us for fantasy, though, and at the point he was being drafted at, I think everywhere I took him somewhere else, everyone felt they were getting good value of where he was going. And he was poised for that breakout that we're still waiting for. He went off the board as wide receiver 28. So even if he did disappoint, you've not lost a huge amount. But it was going to be tough for him to absolutely let us down. And that's what he's managed to do so far. So wide receiver 12 in week 2, then a 6.3 point week, 5.7 and a 2 point week. Everyone has dropped him. Then an 18 plus point week. Oh, brilliant. We can all plug him in again. Boom, he's in all those lineups. He's tricked us. 2 targets, no receptions, no fantasy points in week 7. So he is, at the minute, the epitome of a trick, because he keeps giving us those little glimpses of promise as we're moving through, and then lets us down massively. is averaging 2.4 receptions a game. So that is the stat that concerns me the most about whether we're going to see this breakout. Like Quentin Johnston, we think last year, he was getting pepper targets and doing nothing with it. In this case, like it's not going to happen. And then this year, he's just not dropping it constantly. He's getting on the end of it more. Justin Herbert's finding him in stride better. You can only get the point. You can only catch the ball if you're being past it. And at the minute, he's just not being targeted by Goff enough to have a route to it, is he?
No, I think you're exactly right. He's just way too inconsistent. And you just can't afford that on your fantasy roster. You can't afford someone who could get you 0 fantasy points. That's just not what you need plugging into any of your positions.
So that is the end of our trick or treat. So just a few players for you to think about there. Please do, when you've taken a moment to subscribe, like, and give us a share. Pop down to the comments as well. Let us know any players that you think you have been tricked by so far this fantasy season, or anyone that has given you quite the fantasy treats. We are hoping, though, Ed, that you have 6 absolute treats for us for the rest of the season in our waiver wire pickups.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, it's getting to the season where it's quite slim pickings on the waiver wire. But as I mentioned earlier, after a week with so many players on a bye, it is worth having a look who's been dropped to your waiver wire, as you might be surprised who some managers have sacrificed if they were in a bind somewhere. Let's start off with Tyrone Tracy. I mean, of course, that horrible injury to Cam Scatterboo, and he's done for the season. Tracy, someone who you may have discarded to waivers, instantly becomes fantasy relevant again, as he'll probably dominate the backfield in New York. I mean, Singletary got some touches, but I think Tracy will likely be worth some fab investment if you're struggling at running back. Xavier Hutchinson, 8% rostered only. I mean, he delivered in week 8. But you have to bear in mind that Nico Collins and Christian Kirk were absent. But Xavier Hutchinson did the job, 5 of 6 receptions, 69 yards and a touchdown, which meant a top 10 week in a quiet week for receivers. I just don't think you can expect consistency from him. And his share percentage will drop when Kirk and Collins come back. Plus, he's got the Broncos this week, so I wouldn't say it's a good week to plug him into your lineups. It's not a good matchup for Stroud and co. And Isaiah Davis, I mean, he's an interesting one, 32% rostered. You could argue that it was interesting that he managed 65 rushing yards and out-received Breece Hall for the first time this year, but it was against the Bengals, so it just doesn't count. And they've got the bye week this week, then they've got the Browns, then they've got the Patriots. So, you know, he's one to avoid, and I don't expect to become fantasy relevant. Moving on to our next 3, let's talk about Cade Otton. We've mentioned him before. He had that anonymous start to the season, which was just inexplicable, especially with the performances of Tampa Bay. But he's averaged over 10 fantasy points per game since week 5. As the receiving options for Mayfield have been limited. Could be worth a stash ahead of the bye, but he does have a tough run of games post-bye, so that's just one thing to consider. Emmanuel Wilson, 8% rostered, the running back in Green Bay. He led the Packers in rushing against the Steelers, which is no mean feat when you're sharing a backfield with Josh Jacobs. 11 carries for 61 yards plus 3 receptions gave him a double-figure fantasy score for the second time this season. Could be worth a flex play if you're desperate, as he does have the Panthers next week. But, you know, that is Josh Jacobs dominates that backfield, so he's not going to be a regular high scorer. And let's finish off with Troy Franklin, the wide receiver in Denver, only 33% rostered, comes off the back of an impressive week 8. We knew that at least one of the Broncos receivers would feast against the Cowboys, and he was the main beneficiary with 6 of 8 for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's yet to produce on a consistent basis, but that connection with his college teammate Bo Nix is pretty enticing, and he might be a solid flex play for the rest of the season if you're in need at receiver.
It was the only thing that made me accept that Marvin Mims had made us look daft with the starts of the week, because as I say, we knew someone was going to it. It was Troy Franklin, a player that we spoke so much about last year. And I think it was, as many people, he just kept dropping in the NFL draft, didn't he, last year? And the reason that I find a route to kind of say that this is possible to be the start of a breakout rather than just a complete standalone week is what you said. That connection with Bo Nix does make it really interesting to watch moving forwards, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's a player he's an exciting player, and there is a route to him over the next couple of years being wide receiver 1 in Denver. But yeah, he just needs to find that consistency.
Well, that is all from us. So slightly shorter show from us this week because I am, as you can see, recording from a different location to normal. So we'll be back, though, in a couple of days with our starts and sits and look ahead to week 9. So that's all from me, Ed. Unless anything you wish to add?
No, I've had my fill of NFL for a while.
We've not mentioned that the mighty Ravens bounced back with a victory as well. That was we should probably say I'll do a spin-off show all about that. And release it without
Mighty Ravens is pushing it. It was a nice win for them.
I might just do a 10-minute show of me just talking about Derrick Henry, and then put it out without letting you know I've done it. Anyway, I think before I ramble on about the mighty Ravens any longer, we'll save everyone from this, mainly you though, Ed, by saying, Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.